Imagine a world where you have everything: unlimited food, total protection, no predators, and perfect weather. Sounds like paradise, right? In 1968, science created exactly this for a colony of mice. They called it Universe 25. It was expected that the population would thrive forever in this utopia. But the unimaginable happened. Instead of creating heaven, they created hell. Mothers devoured their young, senseless violence broke out, and a caste of males emerged who stopped living, only eating and sleeping until they went extinct. They had everything they needed to be happy, yet they chose death. The terrifying part isn't what happened to them, but how much their ending resembles our current society. To understand the nature of civilizational collapse, we must observe the experiment of ethologist John B. Calhoun not as a simple laboratory test with rodents, but as an accelerated simulation of the fate of any social species confined within the paradox of abundance. Universe 25 was designed as a wooden octagon, 2.5 meters in diameter, a perfect architectural environment where scarcity had been mathematically eradicated. The food and water dispensers were infinite, the risk of disease was nil, and the temperature was maintained at a constant spring-like level. There was no need to fight, flee, or search. The struggle for survival, that biological engine that has driven evolution for millions of years, had been artificially disconnected. At first, the colony responded as expected, with a phase of explosive growth that researchers called the exploitation phase. The animals, freed from the burden of environmental stress, reproduced exponentially, doubling their population every 55 days. It was, in appearance, the triumph of life over death. However, on day 315, something imperceptible broke in the collective psyche of the enclosure. Although the physical space was designed to comfortably house nearly 4,000 individuals, population growth stopped abruptly at 2,200. There was no lack of physical space, but social space had been exhausted. Here begins the true forensic analysis of the catastrophe. The pathology was not overpopulation in terms of density, but the saturation of roles. In a natural environment, an animal reaches maturity and must find its place in the hierarchy, defend a territory, or seek resources. In Universe 25, all territories were occupied, but nobody died. The old generations did not make way for the new. The young, upon awakening to existence, found themselves in a world without vacant functions. There were no challenges to overcome and no status to gain. Stripped of a vital purpose, the social structure began to dissolve into what Calhoun called the behavioral sink. This phenomenon manifested first in the dominant males, who, unable to maintain control over a territory flooded with passive intruders, collapsed under unbearable stress and abandoned the defense of their nests. The immediate consequence was an invasion of private space, forcing lactating females to adopt aggressive roles to defend their offspring, an unnatural task that elevated their cortisol levels to such a point that maternal instinct inverted itself. We saw mothers who abandoned their litters, who attacked their own offspring, or who simply forgot the newborns while moving from one feeder to another. Society fragmented. The rejected males, those who found no place in the hierarchy, grouped together in the center of the enclosure, in a trembling mass of inactive bodies. Occasionally, they erupted in bursts of extreme and gratuitous violence, attacking their peers not out of competition, but from visceral frustration, biting their companions' tails in an act of ritualized cannibalism that responded not to hunger, but to madness. But most disturbing, and the central point of today's archive, was the appearance of a new class of individuals who represented the terminal phase of the species. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. These were males who decided to withdraw completely from social competition. They did not fight. They didn't seek females for reproduction. They did not interact. Their behavior reduced itself to the most basic biological functions: eating, drinking, sleeping, and above all, grooming. Not participating in the violent skirmishes at the center of the enclosure, their skins bore no scars. Their fur was immaculate, shiny, and perfect. They were living statues of apathy. The beautiful ones represented the absolute renunciation of social life. They had discovered that the only way to survive in a world saturated with noise and aggression was total disconnection. They became autistic individuals in the strictest sense, locked in a bubble of narcissism where the other did not exist. And here is where the observation of rodents becomes an uncomfortable mirror for human anthropology. When the population of the beautiful ones and the isolated females became the majority, reproduction ceased completely. Even when the population began to fall and space became abundant again, society did not recover. The animals had forgotten how to be mice. The few offspring born in this late stage grew up without behavioral models, incapable of understanding courtship, rearing, or interaction. They had lost the culture of their species. Calhoun defined this moment with a lapidary phrase: the first death. According to his theory, a social organism dies twice. The second death is physical, the cessation of breathing. But the first death is the death of the spirit, the extinction of complex behavior, desire, and purpose. In Universe 25, the death of the spirit occurred long before physical extinction. The inhabitants of the enclosure continued breathing for months, eating from the infinite supply, displaying their perfect fur. But they were no longer alive. They were biological shells wandering in a paradise that had become a coffin. If we shift the lens of this microscope to the great human metropolises of the 21st century, the morphological similarities are difficult to ignore. We observe a population density that continues to grow, concentrating millions of individuals in vertical spaces where social friction is constant, but emotional connection is minimal. We see the emergence of phenomena such as the Hikikomori in Japan, young people who retreat to their rooms, provided with food and unlimited digital entertainment, renouncing any physical interaction with the outside world, a technological version of the beautiful ones. We observe a vertiginous drop in birth rates in the most developed societies, where the abundance of resources does not translate into greater offspring, but into an indefinite postponement of adult life. We see a polarization of behavior, oscillating between excessive digital aggression and absolute face-to-face apathy. The paradox that Universe 25 revealed is that material utopia can be the trigger for psychological dystopia. Struggle, effort, and necessity are not mere obstacles to happiness. They are the scaffolding upon which identity is built. Without the need to cooperate to survive, social bonds become superfluous. And when the other ceases to be necessary, they become a nuisance. The experiment ended with the death of the last mouse, years after its beginning, leaving the enclosure in sepulchral silence, full of food that no one would eat. The lesson that today's anthropological archive leaves us is not an inescapable prophecy, but a biological warning. Unlike Calhoun's rodents, the human species possesses the capacity for self-awareness and cumulative culture. We can look at the cube from outside. We can understand that absolute comfort is an evolutionary trap. But the question remains floating in the stale air of our cities. If we eliminate all difficulties, if we cure all diseases and automate all work, what will we become? Will we be capable of inventing new purposes, or are we condemned to groom our own immaculate fur while we wait, alone and in silence, for the end of our own Universe 25?